anymore. I was driving across the country for a kind of hectic trip. I had to get some things done for work at an office way up in Maine, and decided that while I was there already on the road trip, that I'd visit some of my friends and family on the East Coast. During my 4th day of driving, I was spending most of that day going through Pennsylvania. There were a lot of cool towns, but most of the drive was through nothing and to get where I was going. It was taking me on a lot of side routes, which were these long and empty on-lane highways. As it was getting late, rain started coming down and my fuel was running low. I hadn't passed any gas stations in a while, so I figured there had to be one soon, but again, this road wasn't really going through any towns. I continued through the rain for another 30 minutes, and barely through the fog I saw a sign for a gas station, and a couple moments later it showed up ahead of me. It was off the side of the road, nestled in the trees, and was really small. It only had 2 pumps and a tiny concession building behind it. Having no other choice, I pulled in and parked. Getting out and opening up my gas tank, when I pulled the pump off and tried to insert my card, though it didn't work. I wiped the dusty screen and tried to see what it was saying, but it didn't say anything. It wasn't even on. I then went over to the only other pump, and it was also off. Frustrated, I looked around with it training and being well past sunset. It was really hard to make anything out. Sure, the place looked old and outdated, but so did a lot of other gas stations. After a closer look, though, I noticed a small light inside the concession building. Hoping it was a worker that could help me, I stepped out from under the overhang covering the pumps and ran up to the door. Moisture was covering the entire glass door, so I couldn't see inside. All I could see was the light reflecting through the glass. I grabbed the handle and it screeched open. When I stepped inside, I immediately knew something was wrong. The store shelves were empty and some even knocked over, and the place just looked like it was destroyed. The light was coming from somewhere in the back, though, and was now clearly some sort of lamp or something. Definitely not a regular store light. I was only in there for a few seconds, and after seeing all of that, I quickly stepped back outside. I didn't know what was going on in there, but I knew it couldn't be anything good and definitely not helpful for my situation. As I backed out of the store and into the rain, I turned around toward my car, but a person was standing next to it. They were completely drenched in water and were just looking around my car and into the windows. "Hey, what are you doing?" I yelled as I quickly made my way up to them. They shot a look at me, then moved their eyes behind me. I turned back to look at the building. The front door was opened and Amon came out into the rain. He had long black hair and a sickly look. He spent no time assessing the situation and instantly started running at me. The other person by my car just backed away as I got inside, but the man running didn't slow down. He came right up to my door and tried opening it, and as I pulled away, a loud metallic scrape vibrated through the car. I sped out of there and back onto the road, making it another half hour before my car ran out of gas. Luckily, I had cell service in the area and was able to get help while I waited, though I looked at the outside of my car and saw a huge line going across the door. It looked like the man had run a knife along it. When I drove away, police informed me later that night that the gas station I was at was not in service for at least a decade. Other than that, though, nothing else came of it, and what would have happened if I didn't get out in time? I left to nothing but firsthand. I was on a road trip from Portland to Chicago. It's nearly a 3-day drive, so I had some places booked to sleep at along the route. I didn't get too particular with what places I chose, but I went with Airbnbs so I could at least enjoy the road trip a bit more rather than staying in a crowded hotel. My first Airbnb was in Wyoming, and the route through the state doesn't pass through any big cities really, so it was in a really small town. It was probably no bigger than 2 or 3 mile long. As I passed the border into Wyoming, it started snowing heavily, only dragging on the long day off driving. By the time I got into town, the roads were covered in snow and the sun had already said it was pretty dead, though I mean, I didn't know much about small towns, but this seemed exactly how I thought it would be, especially in a low population state like Wyoming. I was hoping there would be a McDonald's or something that I could get a quick dinner from, but it was very clear that there wasn't going to be, so I drove through the town and turned down the road to my Airbnb. It was a long driveway leading up to a small home in the middle of a field with tall snow-covered pine trees lined up in the front yard. I parked on the side and got out with my bag, then walked around to the front. I put in the code and got inside, closing the door behind me and turning in the lights. It was small, probably 500 square feet, with just a living room and bedroom. I took my shoes off and dropped my bag next to the bed, then sat on the couch. When I did, a thump came from the bedroom. I looked back at the doorway I had just come from. It was pretty loud, but I had no idea what it could have been. I got up and walked back, looking into the room and turning on the light. It was all the same. I went and checked the small bathroom that was in there as well, but it all looked good, and the only other door in the house was the bedroom closet. I walked over and tugged on the door handle, but it didn't budge. It seemed like it was locked from the Other side, at first I was pretty weirded out that a bedroom closet would be kept shut, but then I thought it could have been a maintenance closet. The owner was storing stuff in there, were no other places to put anything, so that was the final conclusion I came to. I went back to the living room and rested my eyes on the couch while thinking through my plan for the next day. After 15 minutes I got back up and went over to the window looking out to see if the snow was still coming down and if the roads were even going to be drivable tomorrow. It was eerily dark outside with no lights from the town showing behind the tall pine trees, and it was still snowing heavily. I shut the blinds and turned back to the couch, but I saw a shadow move in the bedroom. It was slow and smooth like the shadow to a door opening or closing. I started walking over, listening as I approached the doorway and looked inside the room. Everything was in place and nothing looked to have caused the shadow I saw, but I knew I saw something moving there. I continued looking around until my eyes fell back on the closet. It was still closed, but something gave me an unsettling feeling about it. I stepped up and grabbed the handle, and it opened with ease. It wasn't locked anymore, but inside there wasn't anything. It was just a small and empty walk-in closet. Before I could fully process everything and try to put the pieces together, I heard someone behind. When I turned around, a large man was standing in the doorway to the bathroom. Looked beaten and tired, having scratches and cuts all over his face, and as I stared at him, he didn't even seem to care. He stepped into the bedroom and kneeled down, grabbing a dirty and worn duffel bag from under the bed. The man then stood back up and didn't even look at me as he slowly walked out of the room and out the front door. I ran up and saw him trailing through the snow until he was beyond the lights from the house. I tried to get police involved, but after giving my description, they really only talked to the Airbnb host. After leaving town, I didn't get any more information. I think it's most likely that he was just using the place to sleep or something, but the way he looked makes me second guess that. I just can't even think of what could have happened if I went right to bed that night with the man hiding in the closet just inches away from me. I've been doing power line inspections for 6 years now. That means a lot of long drives, a lot of coffee and gas station parking lots, and a lot of time in places where you can go hours without seeing another person. If you've never been out here in the Appalachian, it's hard to explain just how deep it really gets. It's like the mountains are folding in on themselves, swallowing everything until the roads turn into scars that disappear into brush. There are spots where your GPS gives up before you even hit the first turn, and then you're on your own. The world just narrows down to mud, rock, and trees that lean in like they're tired of letting you through. Last fall, I got called out for an outage up on Mill Branch Ridge. Now, nobody outside the locals even calls it that, and you won't see it labeled on any map. Mill Branch is one of those places that doesn't exist on paper, but everybody around here knows it. They don't talk about it much, though. When they do, it's usually in passing, like, "Don't drive that way after dark." They make it sound like they're warning you about potholes or maybe meth labs. But there's this edge in their voice, like they know something they can't quite put into words. Dispatch told me the line went dead after a storm rolled through. Probably a blown insulator or a tree limb across the wires. Basic stuff. I loaded the truck, checked my gear twice, and rolled out before sunrise to beat the fog. The first hour wasn't bad. Paved county roads, a couple gas stations with flickering neon signs, and the usual stray dogs that think chasing a utility truck is the highlight of their day. But the deeper I drove, the emptier it got. The last house I passed looked like something out of a ghost story. 2 stories high, leaning on stilts over a slow, sickle-looking creek. Windows blacked out, no curtains, no sign of life. The mailbox was bent so far forward it looked like it was bowing in defeat. Past that, the gravel started and everything else just stopped. No signals, no houses, no signs, just bare trees clawing at the gray sky, stretching in so tight it felt like driving through the ribs of something dead. When I finally hit the gate to the right off-ways, it was nothing but a rusted chain strung through 2 leaning posts that looked like they'd been standing there since before asphalt was a thing. The padlock was so corroded it had to throw my whole weight into the wrench to get it loose. Company rules say you're supposed to log the time, place, and conditions before you leave the main road. So I pulled out my phone. No bars, not a flicker. Big surprise. I drove in anyway. Tires slipped on ruts that had turned into trenches of mud from the storm. The cut line was barely wider than the truck, just brush closing in on both sides like it wanted to erase the path behind me. Only sound was the engine groaning and branches scraping the mirrors like fingernails. I made it about 2 miles before the grade turned mean, steep enough that going forward felt like a good way toned up on my roof. So, I parked on a flat stretch, threw on my vest, and started walking pole to pole with the scope. First few were fine, crossarms solid, no hardware dangling, no scorch marks. Honestly, it didn't even look like the storm had done much damage out here. But then I got to pull 117, and that's where it started to feel wrong. The ground, it wasn't just wet, it was black. Not dark brown like soaked dirt. Black like oil had spilled out and bled into the earth, leaving this perfect circle around the base. It glistened even under that flat daylight, slick and heavy like it had weight to it. It didn't run off, didn't pull, just sank into the dirt like the earth had rotted from the inside out. And right in the middle was something pale. At first glance, I thought it was bark or maybe odd air bone washed in by the rain. But when I crouched and brushed the mud off, I froze. It wasn't bone. It looked like skin, gray, white, wrinkled, stretched thin like parchment over something that had hard ridges under it. Tendons, maybe. I was still staring at it when it twitched. Just a small ripple like a muscle spasm under the surface. It stumbled back so fast I nearly went down in the muck. My first thought was that I'd found some half-dead animal barely hanging on. But then I heard it. A sound I swear I can still feel in my teeth when I think about it. Not breathing, not a growl, a click, wet and deliberate, like someone pressing their tongue against the roof of their mouth. Except it didn't sound right. Too hollow, too deep, like it was coming from a throat that didn't know how to make noise. I swung my light toward the tree. First, nothing. Just rows off trunks fading into shadow. Then something moved low to the ground, sliding between two trees like smoke before pulling itself upright. And God, I wish I hadn't seen it. It stood on two legs. But that's where the resemblance stopped. It was too tall, too thin, arms so long the hooked fingers almost brushed its knees. That same gray-white skin, slick and hairless, like the thin gin the mud was part of it. Where its eyes should have been were hollows, not empty, but darker than the skin around them. Like light just died there. And its mouth, it didn't just open, it split. The jaw peeled back in two directions, cracking wide like someone splitting a log until it looked like its head was breaking apart. I started backing up, slow at first, then faster, every nerve screaming to turn and bolt. But my brain too locked on keeping the light on it. The black muck sucked at my boots, coating them in that oily film. And that's when the smell hit. Metallic and sweet, sharp enough to claw the back off my throat. Copper, like blood left in water too long. The thing didn't make a sound when it moved. Not one. No twigs snapping, no leaves shifting, but its legs bent wrong at the joints. And when it stretched to full height, its spine arched back so far it looked like it wanted to scrape the sky. I hit the truck door with my hip, fumbled the keys like an idiot, dropped them once, hands shaking so bad I barely got them in the ignition. When the engine roared, the sound cracked the silence like a gunshot. That's when I saw it again. It was standing at the edge of the clearing now, head cocked, mouth working open and shut in those silent gulps. I slammed the gas. Mud spat up like shrapnel, tires screaming. For the first 100 yards, I didn't even glance in the mirror. When I finally did, I wished I hadn't. It was running not upright anymore on all fours. Joints folding and unfolding like a spider, jerking inburst that closed the distance way too fast. It wasn't fast enough to catch me, but it wasn't falling far behind either. Mud slapped against its body, and it didn't even blink. Then, just as I hit the last bend before the gate, it stopped. Stood there in the track, rising back up on two legs, bent like a question mark, head tilting one way, then the other, slow and curious, like it was memorizing me. Even when the trees finally swallowed it, I swear those hollows were still burning through me. I didn't breathe right until I hit pavement 20 minutes later. My boots were still slick with that black muck, and the cab smelled like that copper sweet stench had soaked into the seats. I logged the outage as cleared. Didn't tell a soul what I saw. If I did, they'd laugh. Or worse, they'd send me back out with some safety guy breathing down my neck. But Pull 117's still on my route. And every time I get assigned that sector, I trade shifts because I know what I saw. I've lived in the Blue Ridge foothills my entire life. Out here, you learn the back roads before you even know the main highway. It's just the way things work. My dad used to tell me the mountains had their own rules. He said, "The ridges will keep secrets if you know how to look for them." I never really thought much about that until the night I realized the ridge might want to keep me. It was late on a Sunday in March, just before dark. One of those evenings where you feel like you've already done enough for the day, but somehow you're still doing more. I'd been over at my cousin's place helping him split wood. He lives way out, like past the last stretch of pavement, where the mailbox is just nailed to a tree and the road is more suggestion than structure. The shortcut home from there is a logging track that winds about 20 m through the forest before dropping you back out near town. I've taken it more times than I can count. It's not exactly a smooth ride. Plenty of ruts and places where you have to straddle the ditch, but it saves you a good half hour. Plus, honestly, I like the quiet out there. That day, though, the quiet didn't feel like the usual quiet. It felt heavy, almost pressed down. A storm had rolled through earlier, short and angry, lots of wind and a burst of rain. And now everything was wet and gray. The world looked washed out. No birds, no bugs. Just that sound of my tires sucking and slapping through mud as I crawled along. About 6 miles in, I hit a tree. It was a big one, a poplar, I think, stretched across the track like someone laid it there on purpose. The roots were torn out on one side, clawing at the sky. I killed the engine, stepped out, and walked around to see if I could move it. Then I stopped cold. The whole undercity off the trunk was stripped bare of bark, not torn or ragged like it had scraped along the ground, smooth like it had been shaved clean. And the roots, something had chewed through them. Not broken, not splintered. Chewed. Deep grooves curling in on themselves like hooks. Big enough you could slide your fingers into them if you were stupid enough to try. It didn't make sense. Too big for a beaver, too weird for a bear. The longer I stared, the more it made the back of my neck prickle. I walked back to the truck, grabbed my phone, figuring I'd call my cousin to bring his saw. No bars, not even a flicker. So, I sat there in the cab, gripping the wheel, running through my options. Backtrack 20 m in fading light or try tom over a tree that looked like it weighed more than my truck. Neither sounded great. That's when I heard it. A scrape off metal against stone. Not from the woods, from under the truck. Every muscle in my body locked up. The keys were still in my hand. I hadn't even started the engine yet. Slowly, I opened the door, crouched down and looked underneath. Nothing, just mud and leaves stuck to the frame. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Probably a rock shifting. Maybe imagined it. She sighed. I stood, brushed the mud off my jeans, and then I saw it. Movement between the trees. Not a deer, not anything I knew. It was too pale, too low to the ground, and it moved fast, gliding almost like a piece off paper sliding across a floor. I only caught a flash before it melted into the dark, but it was enough to make my gut twist hard. I climbed back in the truck and slammed the lock down without thinking. My heart was hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. The woods were dead quiet now. No wind, no drip from branches, nothing. Then the scraping came back. Not under the truck this time. On the bed. Slow, long drags like claws on metal. I stared through the rear window, my breath fogging the glass. Nothing there, just gray trees and my own reflection. I told myself I was imagining it, that the storm had my nerves shot. Then the tailgate slammed. One heavy hit like something dropped on it from above. The whole truck jolted forward. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I jammed the key in, twisted, and the engine roared to life. I floored it. The tires spun in the mud before catching. And then I was flying. Branches whipping the mirrors. Mud spitting everywhere. Half a mile later, I made the mistake of looking in the mirror. It was there, running in the middle of the track, not crawling anymore. Upright and wrong. Its shoulders were bent like broken wings. Arms so long they nearly scraped the ground even as it ran. Its head hung forward, jaw swinging wide, too wide, like it wasn't attached right. The skin was white, so white it almost glowed, and the eyes two black holes that swallowed everything. I floored it. The truck fishtailed, nearly clipped a tree, but I didn't let up until the woods broke and the tires hit asphalt. I didn't stop for 10 miles. When I finally did, shaking so hard I could barely turn the key off, I walked to the back. The tailgate was bent inward. Deep grooves ran along the metal in curling arcs sharp enough to catch a fingernail. I drove straight to my cousins, told them everything. I sold the truck the next week, and I don't take the logging road anymore. Again, earlier this spring, I was camping in the woods 4 hours north of where I live. There was a small lake that I'd go to a lot. It was never crowded or even really known about, I don't think, so it made for a nice peaceful getaway every time I went. When I got there on the first day and set everything up, nobody else was there. The lake wasn't too big and was surrounded by a grassy beach with the woods around it, so I could see pretty much all around the lake. Not too long after I arrived, I saw a man come out of the woods on the other side and set up a tent. He looked like an average camper and was keeping to himself for the first little while before sundown, though I saw him making his way around the lake and over toward my campsite. He had a friendly smile and produced himself as William. He said he wasn't sure if I saw him set up camp or not, but he saw me across the lake and just wanted to say hi since we were both out in the middle of nowhere at a lake that nobody usually comes to. We talked for a while and he was really cool. Actually, William was 26, which was around the same age as me, and we both liked this camping spot because of how secluded it was. After talking for 30 minutes, he went back to the other side of the lake as the sun was coming down. Not much else happened that night, but in the morning we ended up talking and hanging out for most of the day. He shared a 6-pack of beers with me and we sat on the beach and had some good casual conversations. When we went back to our tents at the end of the day, I was sitting by my small campfire and was really happy I'd met William. He seemed like the perfect buddy to go camping with, maybe some other time. As it got later, though, I started getting ready to stomp out the fire and go to bed when I saw William walking around the lake. His campfire had gone out a while ago, so I thought he was in his tent already sleeping, but apparently not. He walked up to my campfire and right away, something was different about him. "Hey, everything good, man?" I said. He smiled and was suddenly back to how he was before, but he said he came over to ask if I wanted to see a cool spot he found that had a great view. I said it was kind of late to be going out, but he assured me that the view was great because it was dark out. The way he was hyping it up made me feel like I could not see it, and what would be the point in camping out in the woods if I had just passed up the good views? I got up and followed him to the other side of the lake, then trailed behind him as he led us through the woods. There was no path or anything, so I pretty quickly knew that whatever spot this was, William had to have been there many times before to know the exact way without getting lost, especially out in the dark. We walked for maybe 15 minutes before William started slowing down. He pointed ahead and smiled like this was the view, but when I walked in front of him and looked out, there was a small structure. It was an old RV or camper that looked like it had been abandoned and succumbed to the elements for years. Moss grew all over it and holes offrest covered the siding. I turned back to look at Willie, wondering what this was, but his face was now cold and empty. He looked like he was a different person. "William, what is this?" He didn't answer. Feeling a rush of fear, I started frantically looking around, and that's when I heard the rusty metal door swing open behind me. I only saw for a quick second as someone else came running out. Before I started sprinting away, I could hear both William and the other person following close behind, but I gave my every strength to keep going. until I lost them. By then I'd run so far into the woods that I had no idea where I was. I just kept walking and keeping my eyes on the trees until the sun came up. By the time I found my way back to the lake, I saw from the tree line that all of my camping gear was gone. It looked as if I was never even there. I stayed hidden and got back on the trail, making it back to my car. I made a report with the local police, but they never mentioned finding anything. I don't think they even really looked, to be honest. What was planned for me that night is horrifying to think about, but at least I got out before having to witness it. I was backpacking through a route I'd found in the Cascades National Park. It was an out and back trail that typically takes 3 days one way and 3 days back. I didn't know too much about it or how popular of a trail it was, but when doing these long backpacking routes it usually doesn't matter because you'll most likely not run into many people anyway. On my third day out though, I passed by one of the campsites and saw a man sitting by his tent. I took a break and we talked for a bit, where he mentioned he was staying there for the night and heading to the peak of the trail on the following day. I told him that that's where I was heading today and that I'll probably see him when he gets there. I left shortly after and got to what would be my campsite for the next 2 nights. The view was something I'd never experienced before and made for a great rest day and peak of the trail. For that whole day nobody passed through, and when it came tea night I was still the only one camping there. I thought back to that guy I'd met at the campsite a day behind me who said he'd be reaching this trail peak on this day. Never showed up though. I thought he maybe decided to turn around for some reason or just camp out for another day at the place he was already at. In the morning I packed up and started back down the way I came, though I got a late start, so at the very least I was hoping to make it to that same campsite. The man was that I was really sore for some reason too, which didn't help, and before I knew it there was almost no daylight left. I put on my headlamp and continued on the trail, walking for another hour past sundown before I made it to the camp. The tent that the man had was still there, set up like he never left. Knowing his plans to continue hiking and just knowing that staying at Tone Camp for several days while backpacking is unusual, I called out asking if he was okay. There was no response. I walked up a bit closer and said I just wanted to check in on him, but the flap on his tent was partially open and nobody was inside. I felt a lump in my throat, like me body knew something wasn't right. I stood and looked all around, not seeing a single sign of him anywhere until I saw a glimmer in the distance. There was a faint light sitting still far out in the woods. I began walking up to it, going about 40 yards from the tents before I found the source. It was a headlamp laying on the ground like it had been accidentally left behind, and the light was so dim that it must have been nearly out of batteries, and it was just then that I noticed someone watching me. They were standing not too far, just 10 yards away, and clearly trying to not be seen. I knew in my gut that this was the man from before, but I felt like I had to say or do something. Hello, do you need help? They stood still and quiet. I'm sorry, I'll leave, I said shakily, then hurried back to the tent. Luckily, I hadn't unpacked anything yet, so I put my backpack on and started walking out of the campsite. As I did, the headlamp in the woods turned off. I got away and walked as far as I could, going another 3 miles to the next camp. I reported it as soon as I could as well, and unfortunately it was just what I thought it was. The man that I had met was missing. There is almost no traces for them to follow, and out in the back country it's nearly impossible to search for anyone. Who that person I saw out there was is likely the biggest unknown that could give us answers as to what happened, though it seems like most of us are aware of the most probable scenario that took place. My uncle had this old hunting cabin buried so deep in the Appalachian it might as well have been on another planet. No GPS, no cell signal, just 3 hours from the nearest town, 2 from the closest gas station, and surrounded by a forest that feels older than time. When I called him to ask if I could stay for the weekend, he hesitated. Not long, but enough for me to notice. Then he said, "Sure, don't expect much. It's rough out there." His voice had this tone like he wanted to add something else, but didn't. I laughed and asked, "Anything I should know?" "Yeah," he said. His voice went flat. "Keep the generator off at night. It leaks fuel sometimes." I joked back, "Got it. No explosions. Anything else?" It was his pause long enough that I thought the line dropped. Then, "Don't wander after dark. You'll get turned around out there." That was it. No explanation, no story, just that dead flat warning that stuck with me the whole drive up. The road felt endless. Switchbacks curling up the mountains like some kind of snake. ridges black against a sky that couldn't make up its mind about nightfall. By the time I hit the dirt track leading in, the sun was gone. The truck clattered over potholes and loose gravel. Trees leaning in so close my headlights bounced shadows across the windshield. At some point, it stopped, feeling like a road and more like a tunnel carved out of the woods. The cabin was smaller than I remembered, just a sagging box with a porch that looked like it was trying to slide off one side. The steps groaned when he walked up, and when I opened the door, it hit me. This smell of old pine dust and something faintly metallic, like old nails in a damp toolbox. Inside was simple. One bedroom, a kitchen with a hand pump, a living room with a stone fireplace that looked like it hadn't seen a flame in decades. Silence filled the space so heavy it almost had weight. I dumped my bag, made a quick meal on the propane stove, and sat on the porch until the light was gone. Out there, darkness doesn't creep in slow. It just slams down. 1 second, the ridges were silhouettes. The next, they were gone, replaced by black that swallowed everything. I locked the door, killed the lamps, and spread my sleeping bag on the couch. For a while, I just stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of my own ears because that's how quiet it was. Sleep didn't stick. It drift, then snap awake, my heart running like it heard something before I did. Could have been nerves. Could have been the old wood popping. I told myself that every time until I heard the scrape. It wasn't loud, just enough to pull me out of half sleep. A slow drag like something sliding against the wall outside. I froze, every muscle locked, and my brain ran through excuses. Tree branch, wind, raccoon, anything that made sense. The forest can make weird noises. I almost believed it until it came again. Longer this time. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Not random, like someone tracing their finger. Slow, deliberate. I slipped out of the sleeping bag, bare feet hitting cold planks. The hatchet I'd used earlier leaned against the wall. My hand went to it without thinking, like my body decided before my brain caught up. I stood there, gripping it so tight McNuckles act, staring at the door. Then it came again, closer this time, right by the kitchen window. And with it, this sound I wish I could unhear. A breath long, wet, drawn slow against the wood like something savoring the feel of it. Every instinct screamed one thing. Stay silent. I crept toward the kitchen, the boards sighing under my feet, every creak like a gunshot in the quiet. My fingers found the edge of the curtain. I peeled it back a sliver, enough to see nothing, just black on black. My own pale face in the glass. Beyond that, shadows lay reading shadows. The kind your eyes want to turn into shapes. And yet, I swear something shifted. Not a full figure, just the sense of something moving. Like the night itself took a step closer. The scraping stopped. Silence dropped so heavy it almost rang. Then footsteps, slow, heavy. Circling the cabin, I backed away, trying to keep my breathing small. Hatchet raised. The steps faded. Soft at first, then gone. A minute passed. 2, 5. Nothing but the old wood groaning like it was holding its breath. I didn't even try to sleep after that. I sat on the floor, back against the couch, hatchet across my knees, eyes on that door, until the first smear off gray touched the windows. When the light was strong enough to see, I finally stepped outside. The yard was slick with dew. The air sharpened my lungs. That's when I saw them. Tracks, not boots, not paws. A straight line from the porch into the trees. Each one deep enough to hold water. Split in two like hooked blades gouged the earth. I followed them because God helped me. I had to know. They went 30, maybe 40 yards, weaving between pines and undergrowth, and then nothing. The trail just ended. No leaves disturbed. No branches snapped, just an abrupt stop in the middle of nowhere. Like whatever made them walked out of existence that broke something in me. I spun, ran back, packed fast enough I barely remembered zipping the bag, and slammed it into the truck bed. When the engine roared, it sounded almost alive, like it wanted to help me get out. The road back was a blur of gravel and curves. I told myself I was fine. I told myself it was over. I clung to that until the last bend before the highway when I saw it. It was there at the Trian, crouched low, watching me go. Its skin was pale, stretched so thin over bones that jutted wrong, like it was built from a blueprint someone crumpled up and tried to smooth back out. Its arms were too long, hands dragging furrows in the dirt like ropes of wet sinew. And its head, God, that head tilted slow as I flew past, jaw opening wider and wider until I swore the whole thing would split in two. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I had booked an Airbnb several weeks in advance in a town I'd never been to. A client I was meeting for work lived in the area, so I was only staying there for a day and then driving back home afterward. The drive was 3 hours, and when I pulled into the driveway and got out, the neighborhood it was in was very quiet. Most of the houses' lights were off and trees covered the lawns, blocking out most of the view. The only thing I really saw was a person walking down the road. They were far down and nothing really looked off about it, but for some reason it just gave me a strange feeling. I went up and unlocked the door, going inside and situating myself. It was a very average house, nothing really special about it, but was great for what I needed it for. After making my rounds and checking the place out, I opened the front door to get my other bag from my car. As I stepped onto the porch, though, I noticed someone standing in the road. It was the person I'd seen walking a few minutes ago, but they weren't walking anymore. They were just standing in the road and facing the Airbnb. As I started walking toward my car, they noticed me and started walking away. I kept my eye on them while I was out there getting suspicious about whatever that was. They seemed to just keep walking, though. Continuing down the street, I went back inside and made sure it was all locked up, then opened the garage and pulled my car in just to be safe. Throughout the next couple hours, I did a few checks outside to see if that guy was still walking around. I didn't see him anymore, though, and having to get up early the next morning, I went to bed. I slept decently, waking up a few times during the night, but my alarm went off at 4 a.m. for me to finally get up. The sun was still down, so it was still dark outside, but I groggy sat up in my bed and right away saw a light coming under the bedroom door. I didn't remember leaving any lights on, though. I thought I somehow must have just overlooked a kitchen light or something. I got out of bed and walked up to the door, but just before I opened it, I heard something on the other side. It sounded like something moving around at the end of the hallway. I opened the door, seeing it was the living room light that was on, which I immediately knew I definitely would have turned off. The sound continued, though, as I walked down the hallway and looked into the living room. A guy was in the corner searching through one of my bags. He had a black hoodie and ripped up jeans, which was exactly what the person I saw walking around wearing. I only looked at them for a second before they turned around and faced me. He didn't look startled at all. It was almost like he was expecting. He dropped the bag on the ground and yelled at me to stay where he was. He began making his way over, and I only had a split second to decide what to do. I turned and ran back to the room, slamming the door shut. Just before he caught up to me, he rammed into it and tried to kick the door down, then started messing with the lock on the other side. I thought quickly and opened a window, jumping out and running away. By the time I was able to get police there, the man wasn't in the house anymore. My bags were gone too, of course. And to make things more terrifying, the bedroom door was opened. He had picked the lock and gotten in, so if I had just stayed and hidden the bathroom or something, who knows what would have happened. Police seemed to think there was more intent behind this man's actions aside from just robbing me, so a pray he doesn't find me. Theories. This was about 10 months ago now. I was spending a few days with my best friend from college in his hometown. I'll call him Chris for privacy. It was a really small town from what I was used to, but Chris was showing me around, and we went to the bars and just hung out and had a good time on my last night there. He mentioned a place he'd been wanting to explore for a while, but hadn't had anyone to go with. It was some abandoned house or town he knew of a few miles out in the woods. We used to go exploring and backpacking all the time in college, so it sounded like a pretty cool idea. Only 30 minutes after hearing about it, we were already trekking through a path in the woods. We still had some sunlight left, but we brought headlamps just in case. About 20 minutes of walking, the trail ended, and we had to follow a very faint footpath through the trees. It went on for another hour before we made it. We could see a house out in the distance, and as we got closer, we could see several more behind it. It wasn't what either of us expected, though. The houses didn't really look That old, they looked weathered and heavily damaged but had modern siding and stuff like that made them look kind of like any other house. There was even a tiny gravel road leading from each of the homes. It looked like maybe they were trying to build a community and something went wrong, causing them to abandon it. Other people had been there before us, evident by the graffiti on the sides of the houses. Chris and I went up to the first house. Looking through the open doorway, there were weeds growing through the floorboards, but it was otherwise empty before we stepped in, though a loud slamming sound echoed through the woods. Both of us jumped and stared down the gravel road that we thought it came from. After that sound, though it was quiet, we had no idea what it was, but after seeing nothing, we went inside the house. There wasn't too much to look at, but what made it so interesting was trying to figure out why anyone would abandon it. The house looks like it would have been nice before it was left behind. After walking around the first floor, we went upstairs to the second. Oddly, it got way darker upstairs, like no windows were letting in any light. The hallway was short with only 2 doors and what looked like an attic in the ceiling. We went up to the first door and opened it, seeing another empty room, but we were quickly interrupted by hearing something downstairs. There were shuffling footsteps coming through the grass and up to the house we were in. We stayed quiet, but we were sure that whoever they were had probably seen us outside. But why would they try to approach us? They walked up to the front doorway, then stopped just before they entered. Hello, we didn't respond. I just want to talk, no harm at all. He sounded older and almost like he was missing teeth or something, stumbling a bit over his words. After that, though, there was a whole minute of silence. He didn't say anything else, but we didn't hear him leave either. We waited another few minutes, still not hearing anything, before Chris Chu quietly went down the staircase and looked over at the front door. He turned and looked back at me with a pale face. There's nobody there. I quickly went to see for myself, but he wasn't leaning. He was nowhere in the doorway. We carefully made our way down and over to the doorway. Looking out, there was one line of footprints in the grass coming from where the other houses were, but no footprints leaving. Both of us figured it out at the same time and bolted for the trees, knowing the guy must have been hiding inside the house. Somehow we got out of the woods as fast as we could and went back to his place. Who that guy was and why he wanted to talk to us, we don't know. I'm sure if he'd found us, though, we probably wouldn't be here. My shift at the ranger station wrapped up around 7 that night. I'd stayed late before hikers love to stretch daylight in the summer, but the trails had been empty for hours. I just lingered, moving papers around, pretending to work. Truth was, I didn't want to go home. Home was a rented cabin way out in the hollow. The kind of place people describe as peaceful, like it's a compliment. No neighbors, no traffic, just trees swallowing everything for miles. The first month, I thought I'd luck out. Cheap rent, plenty of space, and quiet. But by month 3, the silence didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt held, like the woods were listening. That night, instead of taking the paved route back, I cut down the old service road that runs along the ridge before dropping into the valley. Hardly anyone uses it now. Logging trucks used to, but those stopped years ago. The road was rough, long, full of blind curves and gravel that made your tires hum. It added 20 extra minutes to the drive. I didn't care. I just wanted time to let my head settle before pulling into that cabin again. The sun was gone by the time I hit the gravel. My headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the dark, catching flashes of pale tree trunks, briars tangling like wire. Every so often, a cicada started up somewhere out in the black, buzzing loud, then stopped like someone hit a switch. The sudden quiet each time was sharp enough to make me tense without knowing why. About 10 minutes in, I saw something lying across the road. At first, I thought it was odd air. Happens all the time. They freeze in headlights, get clipped by a truck, stumble off, collapse in the road. But the closer I got, the less sense it made. It wasn't the right shape. Deer are solid through the middle, legs tucked or sprawled out. This thing was stretched out, long and narrow, like someone had pulled it from both ends. My stomach went tight without me even realizing. I eased to a stop about 20 feet away. Engine humming low, lights full on. Whatever it wasn't dead. Its chest, or what I figured was its chest, was moving, slow, deep, not like fluttery breaths of an animal in pain. This was deliberate. I just sat there, both hands on the wheel, waiting for Itto Twitch to move in a way that made sense. But then I tapped the horn. Quick, sharp blast. The sound cracked through the trees, bounced back at me. Nothing. Not a twitch. I should have thrown it in reverse right then, gone back the way I came. That would have been the smart move, but I didn't. I pewed it in park and got out. The night air was heavy, sticking to me like a damp blanket. Gravel crunched under my boots as I walked past the hood, the headlights throwing long, bent shadows into the treein. Every nerve in my body screamed, "Stop! Turn around!" But my legs didn't care. I got within 10 feet and froze. It wasn't fur. What I thought was matted hair was skin, gray and slick-looking, stretched so thin I could see dark lines underneath like veins or bones. Its arms were too long, bent at sharp angles that didn't look right. Fingers spread wide in the dirt like it was gripping something. Its head was turned away, and that's what made messed up cold. It wasn't turned like someone lying on their side. It was turned back, so far back it didn't look possible, like there wasn't a spine to stop it. And then it moved. Not a jolt, not a startled kick. One arm bent slow, the elbow folding sharp as those long fingers dug into the gravel. It dragged itself forward an inch. No sound, just the scrape of stone under its hand. I stumbled back so fast I almost went down. Slammed into the car door, fumbling for the handle. Got it open, half dove inside, breath coming too fast. That's when I heard it soft at first, like it was inside my head, then louder, clearer. Click, click, click. Not a bug, not a branch cracking. This was deliberate, timed, coming from its throat, or whatever passed for one. I looked over the roof of the car. It was kneeling. Now, if you can call that kneeling, its limbs bent wrong, sharp angles, like the joints were in the wrong places. And its head, that head turned all the way around. It was facing me now. The eyes were wrong, too far apart, black and round, like holes punched through wet paper. No reflection, no shine, just empty. And then it stood. I don't know how. It shouldn't have been able to, but it did. Slow, smooth, like it was unfolding. Taller than me, taller than the car. Its arms hung so low the fingertips nearly scraped the ground. The clicking didn't stop. It sped up. Faster, faster, like a metronome losing control. I slammed the door and floored the gas. Gravel spit behind me as the car fishtailed, caught the road, shot forward. I didn't look back until I hit pavement. When I did, it was standing in the middle of the road, perfectly still, watching the taillights disappear. I didn't sleep that night. I had been driving since late afternoon, heading home from a job site in Virginia back to Western Kentucky. Long day, long week. I just wanted to get back, shower, and crash in my own bed. I hate interstates. They're too straight, too predictable. Makes me feel like I'm stuck on an assembly line. So, when my GPS suggested a rural route through the mountains, I figured, why not? Promised to save an hour. And at that point, shaving off 60 minutes sounded like the best deal in the world. First, it was fine. Winding roads, lots of trees, a little old-school Americana vibe. But the deeper I went, the stranger it felt. Those curves weren't just sharp, they were relentless. Switchback after switchback, the road folding in on itself like some cruel joke. What started as 2 decent lanes shrank to a strip of cracked pavement barely wider than my SUV. No guardrails either, just a white line and then a sheer drop into nothingness if you took a curve too fast. The sun dipped behind the ridges, and that's when it really hit me. I was in the middle of nowhere, and once night fell, the world turned into 2 things. The white tunnel of my headlights and the black blur of trees whipping past on both sides. No streetlights, no houses, not even a lonely mailbox. Just trees and the road and me. After a while, that emptiness started to get under my skin. You know that weird, prickly feeling you get when you realize you haven't seen another car in way too long? That thought kept looping in my head. No headlights coming at me, no tail lights ahead, just miles of black. And then I saw it. The fuel gauge, a hair under a quarter tank. Normally that wouldn't bother me, but out there, no towns, no gas stations, no cell towers, just an empty road twisting deeper into God knows where. My brain immediately started running through every worst-case scenario I could think of. Running out of gas in the middle of nowhere, freezing in the car all night, some random lunatic finding me broken down on the shoulder. I could almost hear my mom saying, "Why didn't you stay on the interstate?" I told myself I'd pull over the second I found a safe spot, stretch, check my GPS for the next station, and keep moving. 5 miles later, I finally spotted a break in the trees, a gravel pull-off barely big enough for 2 cars. It felt like a gift from the universe. I iced the SUV onto the shoulder, threw it in park, and shut off the engine. For a second, I just sat there with my hands on the wheel, listening to the tick, tick, tick of the engine cooling down. That's when I realized something was wrong. It hit me slowly. At first, I was just glad for the break, but then I noticed the silence. Not the peaceful kind you expect in the woods. This was hollow, dead, like someone had sucked all the sound out of the world. My ears almost rang from how empty it was, and then cutting through that emptiness came a sound. Click, faint but sharp, from somewhere past the tree. At first, I thought I imagined it, maybe a branch shifting in the wind. But then it came again. Click, slow, uneven. Not wind, not leaves. It sounded deliberate, like tapping. Soft, sharp taps spaced too far apart for footsteps. Almost like a dog's nails on a hardwood floor, but off like whoever or whatever was making it didn't quite understand how to move its legs. I opened the door slowly, like that would make any difference, and stepped out. My boots crunched the gravel loud as a gunshot in the stillness. I stretched, trying to talk casual, but my muscles felt locked, stiff. That clicking sound was still there. Same rhythm, same spot. And now there was something else. Breathing. At least I think it was breathing. Long, slow inhales, short exhales, like someone savoring the air. So faint I held my own breath just to hear it better. Yeah. Breathing. That's when my brain really kicked into overdrive. Bears, coyotes, a person. That last one hit the hardest. A person out here standing just past the tree line, breathing heavy and making that weird clicking noise. The idea made my stomach knot. I told myself to ignore it, just check the map and go. I leaned into the SUV to grab my phone from the dash. No bars, figures. I turned to get back in the driver's seat. That's when I saw him. Eyes not glowing, but catching just enough light for my dome lamp to shine like 2 dull coins in the dark. They were low to the ground at first, too low for a person, but then they rose. Not fast, not sudden, just slow, controlled, and then something stepped out from the trees. I swear I still don't know how to describe it without sounding crazy. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, but its limbs were wrong. Too long, too thin, joints bending in ways that didn't look possible. Every move it made was careful, like it was mimicking something it had seen before, but didn't quite get the details right. Its head tilted in these sharp little jerks like a bird's eying me up. And its face, God, its face looked almost human. Almost like someone tried to draw a person from memory and got most of it wrong. Eyes too far apart, mouth stretched too wide, features scrambled like a bad copy. It froze, completely locked up. My brain screamed, "Move!" but my body wouldn't. And then it opened its mouth. It didn't speak in its own voice. It used mine, my exact voice. Same tone, same pitch. And it said one word, "Run." I don't even remember making the decision. My body just moved. I dove into the car so fast I smashed my shoulder against the frame. My keys slipped out of my hand and hit the floor mat. While I scrambled for them, that clicking sound started again. Faster now, circling the SUV. I could hear it scraping against the gravel on both sides. Too fast, too smooth for something that big. I jammed the key into the ignition, praying like hell. The engine roared. I slammed the gear shift into drive and floored it. Tires spat gravel as I fishtailed back onto the road. In the rear view for just a split second, I saw it standing in Thepaloff, watching me leave, head cocked, arms hanging like broken branches. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. My hands were welded to the wheel and my foot stayed on the gas like my life depended on it. I took those curves like a maniac, tires squealing on every turn. When I finally saw the glow of a diner sign, maybe 40 miles later, I pulled in so hard I nearly clipped a trash can. I parked and just sat there gripping the wheel, shaking so bad my fingers hurt. I didn't go inside, didn't order food, just sat there for 20 minutes staring at the empty road behind me. I'd been on that trail before, but never this far out and never in winter. The cold changes everything out there. The trees were stripped bare, their branches clawing at the gray sky. The ground had that soft, spongy feel from months of rotting leaves. I started out at 10, thinking I'd hit the overlook, maybe eat a sandwich, and make it back before the sun dipped. 12 miles round trip, 6 up, 6 down. Doable. I'd done harder. About 2 hours in, I noticed the quiet. Not just quieter, silent. The kind of silence that doesn't announce itself. It just happens. 1 minute there's background noise. The tap of a woodpecker, a squirrel kicking leaves, branches creaking in the wind. Then nothing, like someone shut off the sound in the whole world. It didn't hit me right away. I kept walking for a while before it clicked. Then I stopped. Just stood there with my breath fogging the air, listening. No birds, no wind, not even the distant groan of trees shifting. Just my boots grinding the frozen dirt and my heartbeat, which suddenly felt way too loud. I told myself it wasn't weird. Animals hide in the cold, right? Birds hunker down, deer stay still, the forest gets quiet, sure. But the way it happened, so sharp, like someone flicked a switch, felt off. That IT didn't fade gradually, it stopped. The trail tightened as it climbed along a rock face. One of those sections where you really pay attention because one bad step means you're sliding a good 30 foot down into a mess of boulders. On my left, the stone wall was slick with ice, glistening like glass. On the right, the drop waited. If you're not great with heights, it's the kind of view that makes your stomach roll if you look too long. So, I kept my eyes on the ground, counting steps in my head like some kid walking on a balance beam. That's when I saw something dark against the pale ground ahead. First, I thought it was a scrap of fabric. People lose things out here all the time. Gloves, hats, random trash. But when I got closer, I saw it wasn't fabric. It was hair. A clump of it, black and coarse, matted with something that looked too dark to be mud. Thick strands stuck together like they'd been ripped out, not shed. I squatted down without touching it, just stared. And something about the side of it, just hair, that's all it was, made my stomach knot. It wasn't just the size of the clump. It was the way it lay there, like it didn't belong. Too much for a squirrel, wrong texture for a deer, and definitely not bear. My first thought was a dog, maybe someone's hunting hound. But there was no blood, no paw prints, nothing. I should have turned around right then. Everything in me knew that, but I didn't. I just kept walking because apparently I have the survival instincts of a wet sock. Another half mile and I saw something else pale against the dark leaves leaning against a fallen log. From a distance, I thought it was a stick. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't wood. It was a bone, long, smooth, and wrong. Too thin for eye or leg, too clean to be random debris. The ends weren't sharp either. They were worn down, noted to a slick, polished shine. And then I saw the footprints. They were off the trail in a patch off soil that hadn't frozen yet. Big enough to be human, but barefoot and not right. The toes curled inward, sharp and hooked like claws. The arches were weird, too high, like whoever left them didn't walk like we do. That's when the little voice in my head went from, weird, to get the hell out of here. And for a second, I almost did. I almost turned around. But, and this makes no sense, the thought of going back down that trail felt worse than going forward. It was like the silence had weight pressing me toward the overlook. Like if I turned my back, something would follow. The trail ended at the ridge. No more path, just a sheer drop into miles of layered hills stretching out like a gray-green ocean under a flat sky. I should have felt relieved when I reached the end. Instead, I felt exposed, like standing in a wide open field during a lightning storm. That's when I heard it behind me. Not footsteps, a dragging sound, something sliding through the leaves. A long pull, then a pause, then again closer. This time I turned. It was standing at the treant. At first my brain tried to fillet under man. It was crouched low, arms hanging down so far they almost touched the ground. But then it shifted and my stomach dropped because nothing about that shape was right. Too thin, too long. The skin looked wrong. Not pale exactly, just off. Like stretched leather left out in the rain. Like paper soaked and dried too fast. And the head. Jesus. The head didn't belong to that body. Too big, too heavy. Hanging forward like the neck couldn't handle the weight. It didn't move fast. Just stood there, the spine bending in these slow, horrible arcs like it had extra joints and the sound. God, that sound. A wet clicking noise over and over, like teeth chattering with no lips to hide them. I started backing toward the cliff without thinking. Every nerve in my body screamed, "Run!" But my legs felt locked. My breath came short and sharp, like I'd been punched. The thing tilted its head slow and curious, like it was trying to see inside me. Then it dropped flat so fast it looked like gravity just slammed it down, and it started crawling. Not like a person, not like an animal. Its arms and legs bent the wrong way, joints snapping loud enough for me to hear. That clicking didn't stop. That broke me. I ran. I didn't remember the first 100 yards. Just trees whipping past, boots slipping on ice and leaves. Every time I stumbled, I felt it behind me, close enough to grab my legs. I never heard normal footsteps, just that dragging scrape and the click, 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 getting faster, sharper. I lost the trail twice, crashed through brush, ripped my hands open on rocks, and still I ran. My lungs burned so bad he tasted blood. My vision tunneled. Every shadow felt alive. But I didn't stop until I saw the glint of my truck through the trees. I hit the door so hard it bounced back at me, dove inside, slammed it shut, and jammed the key into the ignition with hands that didn't feel like mine. When the engine roared, I heard one last click. Close. Too damn close. I didn't look back. I threw the truck in gear, tore down the dirt road so fast the wheel jerked under my grip, and I didn't care. I haven't gone back to that ridge. My dad had this old hunting cabin way out in the Appalachians. Seriously out there. No cell service, no neighbors, nothing but mountains and trees in every direction. It was built by his grandfather and used for deer season every year. But that winter, it had been sitting empty for months. Right before the big snowstorms were supposed to hit, Dad asked me to go up with him to check on it. He wanted to grab some gear he'd left behind and make sure the roof hadn't caved in. Honestly, I didn't mind. Growing up, those trips were some of my best memories. Me, Dad, and the woods. Back then, it felt like a fun adventure. But when you're older and you go back, something about it feels different. The mountains seem bigger. The quiet feels heavier. You start realizing just how alone you really are out there. We left late in the afternoon, which I told him was a bad idea, but Dad waved it off. "We'll meet before dark," he said. Famous last words. I drove most of the way while he navigated, and with every mile it felt like we were peeling back layers of civilization. First the gas stations disappeared, then the houses, then even the power lines vanished. It was just us and these winding switchbacks cutting through endless walls of trees. By the time the dirt road appeared, the sun was gone. Headlights lit nothing but bare trees and old snow clinging in patches along the ground like mold on bread. I asked if we should just turn back and come in the morning. Dad shook his head. Better to get it done now. That road, it barely counted as a road. Deep frozen ruts, potholes big enough to swallow a tire. Branches clawing at the sides of the truck. I crawled along at a snail's pace, trying not to end up in a ditch. That's when something ran across the headlights. It moved on all fours. It wasn't a deer. I knew instantly. The body was too long, the limbs too thin. Everything about it was off. It didn't leap like a deer either. It glided smooth low, like it was poured from one side of the road to the other. Then it was gone. What the hell was that? My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Dad stared straight ahead. Probably nothing. Keep driving. He was lying. His voice was too calm, too careful, like he didn't want me thinking about it too much. When we finally hit the clearing, the cabin was smaller than I remembered, hunched against that tree like it was trying to disappear. I parked, killed the engine, and the silence that fell over us was heavy. No wind, no bugs, no anything. Just stillness pressing in from all sides. Inside, the place smelled like old wooden dust. Same rickety table, same stone fireplace, same 2 bunks shoved in the corner. I got a fire going while Dad walked the perimeter. When he came back, he locked the door behind him. That made me pause. He'd never done that before. "You expecting company?" I tried to joke, but my voice cracked a little. He didn't laugh, didn't even look at me, just muttered, "Never hurts," and sat down. We ate chili in near silence. The only sound was the fire popping and Miss Spoon clinking against the bowl. I kept replaying what I saw on that road. The way it moved, those long arms, how fast it disappeared. I told myself it was the headlights messing with me. Had to be. Then we heard it. A scrape along the outside wall. Not a random creak or some loose board groaning. This was deliberate, slow, light claws dragging against the wood, biting in deep. It started near the back and crept toward the door. Dad froze, his spoon hovered midair. His eyes locked on mine, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then he set the spoon down, stood up without a word, and grabbed his rifle. My pulse was pounding so hard it felt like it was in my ears. He yanked the door open fast, flashlight slicing through the dark. Nothing, just the truck glinting with frost and the black smear of trees. "Stay here," he said. I wanted to say something, but my throat wouldn't work. He stepped off the porch, boots crunching in the snow. The beam of his flashlight swung across the clearing, catching bursts of white between the trees. Then he disappeared around the side. A few seconds later, I heard him curse, low and sharp. When he came back, his face was pale and tight. "Pack up now." "What? Why?" "Do what I said." The way he said it snapped me into gear. I started shoving things into my bag, hands shaking so hard I dropped my flashlight twice. That's when I saw the tracks through the window. They weren't boots. They weren't paws. They were long, narrow impression spaced too far apart, like something crawling on hands and feet, but stretched out in this awful, unnatural way. The fingers, or whatever they were, had carved deep grooves in the snow. We didn't talk while loading the truck. Dad kept the rifle raised, eyes cutting from the trees to the roof and back again. I climbed in, heart slamming so hard it felt like it might crack a rib. When he fired the engine, something moved in the trees. I saw it. Just a flicker, but it was enough, low and fast, weaving between trunks, keeping pace with us as we rolled out of the clearing. I gripped the door handle like it could hold me together. Every time the headlights caught a gap in the trees, I swear I saw it again. Those arms swinging too low, its head hanging, legs bending wrong. It didn't run like a person or an animal. It slid smooth and silent, like water spilling downhill. The road out felt endless. Every bump rattled through the truck like a gunshot. Once I glanced back, and in the glow of the tail light, something shifted just beyond the edge of the road. Crouched there perfectly still, like it was waiting for something. We didn't breathe until the dirt turned to pavement and the trees finally thinned out. Even then, Dad didn't slow down. Miles later, when the first street lights showed up, Dad finally spoke. That wasn't an animal. His voice sounded hollow, like the words were too heavy to carry. He didn't look at me, didn't say another word for the rest of the drive. We never went back to that cabin. This happened in July of last year. My house was having some pretty big problems and I was left without any power for several days while it was getting repaired. I worked from home, so this was a major issue, and I ultimately had to rent out an Airbnb to stay at for a few days until the power was back on in my home. I don't live in the biggest city, so there weren't too many options for Airbnbs near me. The closest one that way at a reasonable price was about a 45-minute drive from my home. It was in an even smaller and secluded area of the city, which was often referred to as not the best section to live in. I was only staying for a few days though, so the amount I was saving was worth it. When I arrived, I went right inside and basically straight to bed, exhausted from everything going on with my house. In the morning, I got up early and started setting up my laptop and workspace. Just before I had to start work though, there was a knock at the door. I debated whether or not to open it because it wasn't even my house, but thinking it might be the host or something, I went up and checked who it was. On the porch was a man, maybe early 30s and covered in tattoos. He didn't look like an Airbnb host or even like a salesperson. Unsure why he was here and not really wanting to know, I figured I'd leave it. I walked away from the door and back to the desk, finishing getting ready and starting work. I had some meetings and a lot off work to catch up on from my absence the last few days. I don't think I left the desk until 8 p.m. and even then I was considering going back to work after going out and picking up dinner only a couple minutes after I got back and started eating though another knock came at the door. I immediately got up and went to check who it was, and I wasn't surprised to see it was that same guy from before. What could he possibly want from me this late in the day though? I was actually more bothered than I was concerned, but again I just walked away from the door and went back to eat my dinner. After 30 minutes and around 1 p.m., I decided to work for at least another hour. I was tired, but the work had to get done, and I knew putting it off until tomorrow would just make me more stressed. I put my headphones in and tried to focus for the next hour. I got a lot done, and once I was satisfied, I finally closed my laptop for the night. I hadn't realized how dark it had gotten. I guess my laptop screen was thinly light. I had on. I went to the front and flicked on the light, and a chill instantly rushed through me. Going down the front hallway were faint but unmistakable shoe prints. Looking around, they were all over the place, even going right up behind the desk I was working at. Terrified, I slowly followed them down to the back door, which was cracked open. I don't even know how to describe what I was feeling. It was just pure horror, and only moments after this, footsteps started coming down the stairs. They were slow and careful, but when they got to the bottom, a man peered out into the hallway and looked directly at me. It was that same man, easily distinguishable with all the tattoos and everything, and he looked surprised to see me walking around, but that surprise quickly turned into rage. His face had no emotions other than irritation and anger. I was going to try to say something, but no words came out, and as my heart started pounding in my chest, I turned right back around and sprinted out the back door. I ran through the backyard and into some trees far behind the houses. I sat behind a tree and pulled my phone out, starting to dial 911, but quickly closed it when I heard footsteps running toward me. I didn't expect them to follow me, but luckily they passed by without seeing me and continued to run out into the dark. Once I got in contact with police, I went back to the Airbnb and waited for them. I gave a detailed description of the man, and they actually found him the next day. It was confirmed to be him by the tattoos I had noticed, and he'd actually broken into several homes in the days leading Up doing horrible things to those who lived in him. I don't know what he was planning to do to me or why he seemed to have left me alone at first, but I can rest easy knowing he won't be able to do anything. My parents owned this old cabin way out in the Appalachian foothills. My grandfather built it before paved roads even reached that area. If you want to find it, you have to follow a dirt track for what feels like forever, then hike another half-mile on foot. It's isolated in the purest sense. The cabin itself is basic. One room, creaky wooden floor, an old wood stove for heat, and a propane lantern for light. That's it. No electricity, no plumbing, and definitely no cell service. It's the sort of place where you learn real quick how much noise your own breathing makes when the world goes quiet. My parents mostly use it during hunting season, and the rest of the year it just sits out there collecting dust and probably raccoon footprints. I've been out there plenty of times, always with family or a couple of friends. But this time I decided to go alone. I just finished one of those brutal stretches at school where you don't know what day it is anymore. 3 weeks of no real sleep, mainlining coffee, and submitting papers at 3 a.m. My brain was fried. I didn't want to see another screen or hear another notification. I just wanted silence, and the cabin is perfect for that. Friday afternoon, I parked at the end of the track. Can't drive the whole way unless you have a death wish for your car suspension. Slung my pack over my shoulder and hiked in. It was one of those hikes where you realize how much crap you packed about 5 minutes in. When I finally saw the cabin through the trees, this wave of calm hit me, like stepping off the grid in the truest sense. The first night was perfect. Lit a fire, cooked something simple, basically a can of chili dumped in a pot, and read by lantern until my eyes felt like sandpaper. Around midnight, I locked up, deadbolt on the door, checked the windows twice. That's a habit out there. When you're surrounded by a 100 miles of dark forest, you double-check everything. Then I crashed in the old bed that's been there longer than I've been alive. The next morning, something was wrong. It wasn't a sound or a smell, just this feeling that snagged at me the second I opened my eyes. Took me a second to spot it. The door was unlocked. Now, I know I locked that door. Not just locked, deadbolt. I remember testing the knob before I went to bed. Out here, you don't half-ass that. But sure enough, the bolt was thrown back. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was tired and forgot. Maybe I didn't turn it all the way. That made sense, right? Still, that thought sat in my head all day like a rock in Micho. By evening, I told myself to drop it. Cooked, cleaned up, and sat on the little porch for a while. It's so quiet out there. It messes with your head. Every squirrel sounds like a bear. Every twig snap feels personal. And when the sun goes down, it doesn't fade like in the city. It just drops. Suddenly, the world is black. Around 11 o'clock, I was inside, rocking gently in this old chair by the stove, half dozing when I heard it. Something stepped onto the porch. Not light steps, heavy, slow. Each board let out this long, aching groan like it didn't want to hold the weight. I froze. My eyes went straight to the door. The boards creaked again, then silence. I didn't even breathe. My heart was doing that loud, thutching thing that makes you feel like it's in your throat. I waited 10 seconds, 20, maybe a full minute. Nothing. Finally, I reached for the rifle in the corner, trying not to make a sound, and crept to the window. The glass is old and wavy, so everything looks distorted. The yard was just shapes and shadows. I told myself it was a deer or a bear. That made sense. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I locked the door again, checked it twice, and shoved a chair under the handle. Sleep? Forget it. Every creak of the cabin felt amplified. Every pop from the stove sounded like footsteps. Around 3 a.m., my eyes snapped open again, and something felt off. Took me a second to realize why. There was this pale glow sliding across the far wall. Not firelight, not my lantern. It was coming from outside that I sat up slowly, throat dry, and moved to the window. There was something in the yard. At first, I thought my brain was short-circuiting from exhaustion. But then it moved. A figure tall, wrongly tall, thin in this broken, almost fragile way, like a scarecrow someone had stretched. It was just standing there, head tilted back like it was sniffing the air. Its skin, or whatever it had, looked gray under the moon, same tone as the trees. Then it turned, not fast, just this slow, jerky motion, like its joints didn't fit right until it was facing me, facing the cabin. The moon hit its eyes, then two pale glints, metallic. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My fingers dug into the wood of the window frame so hard they hurt. It didn't walk like a person, kind of slid forward like its legs weren't bending right. I yanked the rifle up, hands trembling so bad I could barely keep it level, and aimed at the window. But it didn't come closer. It just stood there watching. Then, without a sound, it turned and slipped back into the trees like it was never there. I sat there until dawn, rifle in my lap, staring at that window. Every sound outside felt like a count. When daylight finally came, I stepped outside. My stomach dropped the second I saw the ground. Tracks, not human, not any animal I've seen. For long toes, each ending in ablent claw. The prints were deep. Whatever made them was heavy, and they circled the cabin twice. I wanted to leave right then, but the thought of walking that half-mile through dense woods, knowing that thing was out there, my legs wouldn't move. So I stayed all day, rifle across my lap, eyes flicking from the door to the windows. The forest was dead quiet. No birds, no bugs, just nothing. When the sun started to drop again, I felt my stomach knot. I knew it would come back. It did. Just after midnight, the boards groaned under something heavy. Slow steps across the porch, then tap on the window. I didn't move, didn't blink. Another tap, then a long scraping sound along the wall, like claws dragging against the wood. And then the voice, low, guttural, like someone trying to speak through a throat full of gravel. First, it was just noise. Wrong. But the longer it went on, the more it started shaping into something. My name. I don't know how it knew. It circled the cabin for hours, tapping, scraping, saying my name like it was practicing at some point. I must have blacked out from exhaustion, because when I opened my eyes again, sunlight was streaming through the window. I stepped outside and my blood ran cold. More tracks, dozens of them, not just around the cabin, on the porch, right up to the door. And carved into the dirt were lines, shapes, symbols maybe. I didn't look long enough to figure them out. I grabbed my pack and ran. Didn't stop until I saw my car. I don't know what that thing was or how it knew my name, but I know one thing. I'm never going back to that cabin again. I was hiking a remote stretch of trail down in southern West Virginia when it happened. I'd been planning the trip for weeks. I needed that. I parked at the trailhead around 900 in the morning. Blue sky, cool air that hit like a wake-up slap. The first few miles were easy. Gentle slopes, big stretches where you can see forever through the trees. Birds chattering like they had gossip to share. I remember thinking, this is perfect, like I'd picked the exact right spot to disappear for a bit. By early afternoon, I passed this old fire tower, totally out of use, all rusted and broken, like something left behind after the world ended. Its metal frame stuck up through the trean. And for some reason, I thought about climbing it just for the view. I didn't. Something about it felt wrong, like if I touched at it, the whole thing would come down on top of me. So I kept walking. That's when I noticed the footprints. At first, it didn't register. The trail had been empty all day. No parked cars where I started. No hikers passing by. So when I saw them, I stopped. They were in this soft patch of mud where water must have pulled after rain. Looked like footprints at a glance, but when I crouched down, something about them made my stomach flip. The heel was too narrow. The toes stretched out long like someone had pulled the front of the boot like taffy. And the tread. God, the tread was warped. Not worn down like old shoes, but twisted, melted, almost like heat had messed with the pattern and left it warped in the dirt. And the worst part, they were fresh. Edges sharp, soil still damp inside the grooves. Whoever left them wasn't far. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe some hunter with custom boots. Maybe even just a weird angle messing with my eyes. Still, my brain wouldn't shut up about it, so I picked up the pace. By 4, I hied a fork. One trail dipped toward a stream. The other climbed a ridge. The map said the shelter was up past the ridge. So, I started climbing. Each step felt heavier, like my pack had doubled in weight. The higher I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my boots and my own heartbeat drumming behind my ribs. Halfway up, I stopped cold. The footprints were back. Same warped shape, same freaky narrow heel and stretched toe, except this time they were ahead of me again, sunk deep into the mud like something heavier had walked through. I followed them a little, just trying to make sense of it. And then they just stopped right there in the middle of the trail. No rocks toe step on, no other tracks leading off, just gone like the thing or person walked 10 feet in front of me and then evaporated. I stood there way too long, just staring, waiting for my brain to offer some kind of explanation. All I kept thinking was, things don't just vanish. When I finally reached the ridge, the sun was bleeding out fast. The shelter sat in this clearing, weathered, old but solid, roof still in. Big wooden platform for sleeping, a blackened fire ring out front. No sign of anyone else. That should make me feel better. It didn't. I dropped my pack and went through the motions. Filter water, boil noodles, hang the food bag in a tree like you're supposed to. Everything felt mechanical, like I was just playing at being calm. By the time I crawled into me sleeping bag, night had swallowed the whole clearing. I must have fallen asleep because the sound hit me out of nowhere. Soft, dragging, slow, like something brushing along the outside wall of the shelter. I froze. My breathing went shallow on instinct, like that would make me invisible. Whatever it was circled the shelter step by step. I could feel the vibrations in the wood under me. When it got to the back wall, the sound changed. Sharp, hollow pops like two stones knocking together in an uneven rhythm. Click, 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 pause, then silence. I don't know how long I laid there before reaching for my headlamp. My hands shook so bad I couldn't hit the switch at first. When the beam finally cut through the dark, I swept it across the clearing. And that's when I saw it just at the edge of the light. Tall, too tall. Its body was stretched out, limbs hanging long with joints bending in ways joints shouldn't bend. Skin pale and tight like plastic wrap over sticks. And the head, that's what burned into me. Narrow at the top, wide at the jaw, and a mouth full of teeth catching the light. Even though its lips weren't moving, it tilted its head slow and sharp like a bird. And then the clicking started again, but its mouth stayed shut. The sound wasn't just coming from it anymore. It was in the trees, in the ground, everywhere. It moved backward, slow toward my pack. Never took my eyes off it. Every step felt like an hour. The thing didn't move, just stood there, head twitching, these tiny jerky motions like it was studying me, deciding something. When my hand hit the straps, I grabbed the pack and ran. I didn't even try to find the trail. I plowed straight into the trees, crashing through brush, branches ripping at my clothes. Behind me, snaps, cracks, too many for one thing. The clicking followed louder, faster until it sounded like 100 teeth chattering in the dark. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs felt like fire. My legs turned to hollow sticks. When I stumbled into a stream, I didn't even think. I just waded in up to my knees and followed it downstream. water freezing against my skin until I saw the glint of a guardrail through the trees. When I climbed up onto that road, my legs nearly gave out. A truck came by about an hour later. Driver didn't ask much, just stared at me through the rear view while I shook in the back seat like Abusted engine. I never went back for my gear. 2 days later, a ranger called. They found my food bag still hanging in the tree, but not the shelter. I thought he meant it burned down. Nope, he said there was nothing there. Now let's start. I'm 34 years old. I took a long weekend. Figured I'd hit the mountains, camp a little, hike a little, let my brain deflate. Just me, the trees, and silence. That sounded perfect. I picked this trail I'd read about on some hiking forum. Ridgeway Loop. People said it was a moderate hike with a few good overlooks. And best part, not a lot of foot traffic. Honestly, that last bit sold me. I wasn't in the mood to make small talk with strangers in moisture-wicking shorts. I tossed my gear in the back of my old Jeep before sunrise and drove 5 hours. The towns got smaller, the roads got narrower, and then finally it was just me and green hills rolling like waves that I could almost feel the stress unclenching from my shoulders as I drove deeper in. When I pulled up to the trailhead, the lot was empty. Not another car in sight. Normally, I'm not thrilled about total isolation because, serial killers. But that day, it felt like a gift. I parked, stretched, checked my map, and hoisted on my pack. The air hit me first, cool, clean, and sharp, like it had never been breathed by anyone before. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about work, wasn't thinking about anything but how good it felt just to be out there. The first couple of miles were easy. The trail wound through these tall, straight trees, their trunks like pillars holding up the sky. The ground was soft with old leaves, the kind that crunch just enough to remind you you're out in the wild, but not so much that you feel like an intruder. By midday, I came across a little creek with water so clear it looked fake. Figured that was my sign to set up camp. I pitched the tent, boiled some noodles on my camp stove, and ate sitting on a flat rock. The only sound was water sliding over stones. No cars, no voices, no endless hum of computers. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you wonder why you live any other way. That night, I made a small fire and stared at it until the stars blinked on. It felt good, simple, like life had dialed back to something I could handle. When my eyes started to droop, I crawled into my tent, zipped the flap, and let the stillness swallow me whole. The next morning, I woke up early. The air had that sharp bite that makes you feel alive. So, I grabbed a light day pack with some water and snacks and decided to hike higher up the ridge to find one of those overlooks the map bragged about. The climb was steeper than I expected, but my legs were eating it up. My lungs burned in the good way. And for a while, I forgot why I'd even come out there in the first place. That was until the trail markers disappeared. First, I figured I just missed one. No big deal. I walked back a few steps, scanned the trees for that bright orange blaze. Nothing. I shrugged. Trails don't just end, right? The dirt path was still under my boots, worn and clear, so I trusted it. That's when it got weird. The first thing I saw was the rope just hanging from a tree branch like some old sad noose. It looked wrong. The rope was frayed, blackened like it had been through a fire. The branch above it was scorched in this perfect ring, as if someone had set a torch to just that spot and walked away. I stood there staring at it way too long, thinking, who does that? Who burns one branch and leaves the rope? I kept moving, but slower now. The next thing was bones scattered across the dirt, pale ascot. Not a full skeleton, just pieces. A rib, something that looked like a femur, except it was too long, stretched thin in a way that didn't look right. My brain said, deer. My gut said no. After that, the silence changed. It didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, like it had weight pressing on my ears. Even my footsteps sounded wrong. Too sharp, too loud, like they didn't belong there. That's when I told myself enough. You've seen plenty. Time to head back. So, I turned around and realized nothing behind me looked the same. The slope was steeper. The trees were closer, crowded like they were leaning in, boxing me. I couldn't see the rope, couldn't see the bones, couldn't see anything familiar. And then I heard it. Not footsteps, not an animal. Breathing, slow, deliberate breathing, dragging air like it was syrup. Then the exhale, wet and ragged, like it was scraping something raw inside. I froze, every muscle locked. Came again, closer this time. And then something else. A low mumble, not words I knew, just broken sounds, like someone trying to copy human speech and failing. My skin went cold. Every instinct in me screamed Tauren, but I couldn't move. Not until I heard the third sound, wood creaking like something huge shifting its weight against a tree. I bolted. Branches slapped my arms, snapped against my face, but I didn't care. My lungs burned. My legs begged to quit, but I didn't stop. I didn't even know if I wasted a trail anymore. I just kept moving, tearing through underbrush, heart hammering like it wanted out. Then blew my tarp, my campsite. I stumbled into the clearing, grabbed my pack with shaking hands, and didn't bother with the tent. Didn't put out the fire. I just slung the straps over my shoulders and ran downhill like the forest was collapsing behind me. And then I made the mistake of looking back. Up the ridge between two trees, something stood. It was tall, too tall. Its head nearly brushed the branches. Its arms hung past its knees, long and thin, like someone had stretched them wrong. Its skin was the color of wet bark, and its head tilted at an angle no neck should allow, cocked like a dog hearing something it doesn't understand. Then its mouth opened. No roar, no growl, just my name drawn out in a voice that sounded broken, dragged over teeth, mangled into something almost human. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes of green, the taste of blood in me mouth from biting my tongue, the pounding in my skull as I ran. I didn't stop until the trees spat me out onto a gravel road. By the time I stumbled into the ranger station, I was half delirious. They told me I'd gone 7 miles off any marked trail, asked if I'd seen bears. I just shook my head. I didn't tell them what I saw. Didn't have the words. I got in my Jeep and drove until those mountains were just a smear in my rear view. Out, I was taking a road trip across the country to my family's house for Christmas. I know driving that long of distance during winter is probably not a great idea, but I couldn't find anyone to watch my dog Frankie. So I had to bring him with me. He's just a little wiener dog, and I thought he'd be terrified of flying. So I decided to drive the first half of the trip down there. Went well without any issues, great weather, easy driving, and no problems on the morning of the second part of the drive, though I woke up to heavy downfall of snow. I packed up quickly and tried to outrun the weather, but it seemed to only get worse. Halfway there, I realized it was taking too long and I wouldn't make it there by the end of the night, so I ended up choosing to find a motel to stay at. Instead, the road I was on was pretty empty. There wasn't much of anything, aside from the occasional gas station every 50 or so miles, so when I finally saw a sign for a motel, I immediately pulled off and into the parking lot. It was a very old-looking building and most of the lights were off, but there was another car parked here, so I figured if had to be a worker. I left the car on for Frankie as I got out and walked through the blizzard and up to the main entrance. The door wouldn't open. I wiped the fog off the outside of the window and put my face closer, trying to look through and see if anyone was inside. It looked dark and deserted. I wasn't sure what to think. Booty didn't have much time before I heard Frankie barking. I looked back, seeing 2 men walking past my car and up to me. The way they walked, it was clear something was wrong. I tried to start walking back to my car and ignore them, but they cut me off. Hey, what was the place open? No, I think it's closed tonight. Sorry, I said, trying to walk around them. Do you think you could help us? We're having some car troubles. Maybe you could spare some gas. It was like they were fighting for any reason to keep talking to me. I said no, then backed up and Medea wide walk around them, and Even then, they still tried to get in front of me. I hurried back into my car as their footsteps crunched quickly behind me. By the time I got in and locked the doors, they were already at my window. Frankie was whining, and I couldn't blame him. This was really uncomfortable and kind of scary since we were so far out on a deserted road. One of them repeatedly knocked on my window asking for help still, but it was so obvious that he didn't need any, and this was just some kind of trap or something. Before anything could get worse, I backed up and drove out onto the main road. After giving it some thought, I ended up dialing 911 to report their strange behavior. I got a call back from an officer 20 minutes later saying they weren't at the parking lot anymore and neither was their car. If that doesn't scream guilty, I don't know what does. Their car clearly worked enough for them to leave, and they apparently left right after I did. More so than my slight interaction with the men, it's the thought of what they were potentially trying to do that horrifies me. If anything had happened out there, I probably never would have been found. I worked at a gas station for 2 years starting in 2015. During the winter on my first year, I had a regular customer come in a lot. I worked night shifts, so whenever anyone came in more than once, I'd usually recognize them. This guy was a trucker who told me his name was Paul. He was a really nice guy, though he definitely had something different about him. He was always smiley, like too smiley and happy, especially for it being the middle of the night. Sometimes I actually found it creepy anyway. One night he came in and he was acting differently. He walked in and greeted me, but as he looked around the aisles, his face was dull and almost angry. He picked out an energy drink and came up to the counter, and his face suddenly changed back to that overly happy look. I could see dread in his eyes, though making his smile seem even more fake and almost disturbing in a way. Paid and walked out to his truck, then drove off. I'd almost forgotten about it until the next day when I saw his truck pull in. Again, it was pretty cold and snowy outside. When Paul came in, he had that same look as yesterday, except he didn't smile at all. He grabbed the first drink on the shelf and came up to the counter. As he paid, he started asking me questions like how busy it was tonight, and when my shift was over. Then, before he left, he asked if I wouldn't mind helping him lift something in his truck. Having known him for so long now, I agreed, wanting to be helpful, and put on my jacket and followed him outside. The gas station was empty aside from his truck parked on the far side of the lot. I followed him over there and he opened the passenger door, then walked around to the driver's side and got in. He said it was right up here, gesturing for me to get in as well. I climbed up and sat down. It was one of those big box trucks that had a door behind the seats for access to the cargo section. I looked at Paul. He had that strange wide smile again. It's just right in there. He'll follow behind you. He pointed at the door. I suddenly felt very unsettled and could sense that this wasn't what he said. It was. I sat there trying to figure out what to say or do, and I began to notice an odor. It was strong and disgusting, coming from whatever the hell was behind that door. I looked back up at Paul. His face was tense, but he held that smile and just watched me, waiting for me to move. I jumped back out of the truck, slamming the door behind me and hurrying back into the station. He didn't follow. As I was hurrying back, though it hot, I heard him yell, like a frustrated yell coming from the truck. The wind covered most of the sound. He pulled out of the gas station soon after. I worked there for another year, and Paul never showed up again, not even once. I don't know what was back there or what was really going on with Paul, but I think I was lucky to not have to find It was just before Christmas. School was out, but my parents still worked during the day. I was an only child, which meant I had the whole house alone and could do whatever I wanted all day while they were gone. This was just another weekday, I think Tuesday, and my parents left for work at 9 o'clock. I immediately fired up my PC in my bedroom and started gaming. Strangely, only 15 or 20 minutes after my parents had left, there was a knock at the front door. Being young and not used to answering the door alone, I chose to ignore it. I tried not to make too much noise for the next little bit because I didn't want them to think anyone was home, hoping they would just leave. I didn't hear any more knocks, so I continued on with my day. I was playing video games for way too long, honestly, like 3 or 4 hours straight. Before I even got up from my desk to make some breakfast, I went downstairs and poured a bowl of cereal, then started walking back to bring it upstairs. When I noticed the front door was unlocked, I thought that was weird because my parents always remembered to lock it and usually would leave through the garage anyway. I went over and slid the lock down, then went back up to my room. I think it was around 1 or 2 p.m. After finishing eating, I got right back to gaming. I had just reopened my game and loaded into a new match, so like only 3 minutes later when I felt something shake my desk. I didn't hear anything, but I had my headset on, so it was unlikely I would have, unless it was really loud. It felt like a vibration, though, which I'd usually only feel from my parents closing a door or something. I took my headset off and looked at the bedroom door, listening for what could have caused it. It was quiet, I got up and opened the door, then looked down the hallway toward the stairs again, listening for anything, and again not hearing anything. I was thinking it could have been the heater turning on, but I couldn't help but think how the door was unlocked earlier, and it just gave me an uneasy feeling. I walked over to the stairs, and just as I got to the top and looked down, I saw a shadow move near the bottom. I froze, and just a second later the shadow stopped moving too, like they somehow saw my heart was pounding. I felt like I stood motionless for an entire minute. Before the shadow moved again, I could faintly hear footsteps walking toward the back of the house, and then the back door quietly open and close, and then silence. I ran to my parents' bedroom and called 911. With the home phone, police came a few minutes later. This only seemed to get more disturbing and strange, though there were no signs of the intruder breaking in unless he had picked the lock on the front door. However, it was still locked when police arrived, which means he likely got inside sometime during the 3 to 4 hours I was gaming. I also think back to the knocks I heard right after my parents had left, but I just can't see what they were doing inside for that long. He was almost definitely in the house when I went downstairs and made myself a bowl of cereal, though maybe even watching me from another room, hiding somewhere. We don't know what his intentions were, but I've never truly felt safe again since that. Again, it was the day before Christmas Eve. I had hopped in my car to do a few DoorDash deliveries. The holiday season would bring in some better tips. It was around 11 p.m. when I got this order. It was a normal one, just a bag of food to drop off at their house. Most of my previous orders were actually grocery deliveries, probably because stores would be closing up for the next 2 days. The address on this one was far, though. Farther than I'd usually be willing to drive, but with not many other orders coming through. I took it anyway. It was lightly snowing outside and the roads were very quiet, making the drive peaceful. The house was not in an average neighborhood, though. When I pulled up, Towhat I thought was going to be the entrance to the neighborhood. It was actually just a thin path through the trees with a small cabin looking home at the end. I pulled down and parked. Getting out with the food, I walked up to the door and gave it a few knocks. Inside I could hear chatter, like a group of people laughing and talking over each other. It sounded like so many people I was actually confused on how they could all fit in such a small cabin. There was also something strange about the way it sounded that just didn't seem right. Something was off. Then the door opened. A man stood in front of me. In the contrast to what I expected had me put off for a second. The inside of the house was still motionless. Nobody was running around and most of the lights weren't even on, and yet the sound of a huge holiday party was coming from the small room at the end of the hallway. The man smiled at me. "Why don't you come bring the food inside? They'll be happy to see you." That was an odd thing to say. I began stuttering, trying to say no and make up an excuse, but the men interrupted. "They just want to thank you for working during the holidays. You'll be glad you stopped by." All the while Hugh was saying these strange and honestly creepy things. The chatter in the back of the cabin continued until it suddenly cut out. Just like that, the cabin was quiet. It was like a recording or tape had stopped playing. The man looked back for a moment, clearly not expecting that to happen, and before he could do anything, I dropped the bag on the porch and ran back to my car. I got in and drove away. I stopped doing deliveries for the night and just stayed home for the rest of the holidays. I know nothing actually happened at that cabin, but it's how disturbingly strange everything was, and the thoughts of what could have happened that still freaks me out. It was the day after Christmas and I worked at a small family-owned grocery store as an overnight stalker. I'm not even sure why I was scheduled this night, because we were closed for Christmas and it was probably really slow during the day, so there wasn't much for me to do as far as stocking. I spent the first hour filling what little needed to be filled on the shelves, but then I kind of just wandered around. As I was walking past the front of the store, I noticed a person outside, unusually close to the building for this time of night. It looked like he was just walking around, but he quickly noticed me looking at him, and instead of going away, he came closer to the window. He didn't say anything or try knocking. He just stared at me. I felt really uneasy and wasn't sure what to do. After a few seconds of him not looking away, I turned and walked away from the window. I guess I was just trying to play it off like I wasn't bothered. That was very strange, though, like no normal person acts like that. I waited a few minutes before going back to the front of the store and looking out the window. He was gone. I sighed in relief, then continued walking around the store to pass the time. I was just weaving in and out of the aisles, fixing up some of the shelves. Maybe 10 minutes had passed when I rounded the corner at the end of one of the aisles and immediately stopped walking. There were several boxes that had fallen off the shelf and were scattered on the floor. They weren't small things either that could have just tipped over. They had to have been knocked down or moved by someone. Just ACI was trying to process it. I heard something from down the aisle, a soft but deep and eerie laugh, like a man quietly laughing right around the end of the aisle. It almost sounded unnatural, like a grown adult giggling. Like a child. Part of me thought about going to confront him, but when I remembered the man I saw by the window, they were fairly big and could have had something hidden in their jacket. I ran to the front and out the doors, getting in my car and calling the police. They pulled in 10 minutes later, and the man inside the store was gone. We later got hold of the security tapes and saw him find a way in through a side door, and as he hid behind the aisle laughing at me, he held a knife in his hand, some kind of small switchblade. Cops think he wasn't sober, and I don't disagree, but I also don't think it changes anything. I could have died that night if things had gone any differently. Music. I was staying inside for the night. It was really cold outside with a heavy snowstorm coming through our town. I had the TV playing my comfort show, and I was half asleep on the couch when I heard footsteps approaching outside my front door. Their boots were loud enough to get my attention and wake me up. I looked at the door, but they didn't knock. They stood there for a few seconds, then their boots took a couple more steps before it suddenly went quiet. It sounded like they stepped off the porch and into the snow, which I could no longer hear. Confused, I got up and looked out the window. The snowstorm was worse than I thought. It was almost completely white outside, making it hard to see more than a few feet past the window. Barely I could make out shoe prints in the snow coming off the porch. Why did they just step off the porch like that? And what were they even doing outside right now with the weather? I couldn't really get any more answers. I checked out the side and back windows for any more shoe prints in case they walked around my house, but I didn't see much of anything. I went back to the couch and laid down. I felt it was weird, but I didn't want to overreact about it. An hour or so went by and there was nothing else. The soft rumble of the snowstorm outside and the low volume of the TV made my eyes heavy, slowly putting me to sleep. When my eyes eventually opened, it was still very dark. The TV was on its timeout screen showing it was 3 a.m. The snowstorm was still going strong, but strangely it was much louder. As I continued to wake up, I began realizing it was extremely loud, like the sound was clear and crisp, not muffled by windows. My eyes darted fully open, and I got up. I turned on the light next to me, seeing water spots all over the room going right to the front door, which was wide open. Snow was pouring into the house, and boot prints were outlined in the water going through the hallway. I could kind of make out the same boot prints leaving the house, but he wasn't sure. I got my phone and locked myself in the bathroom. As I called for help, turned out whoever broke in had already left. It seemed they came in and looked around for something specific, and after not finding it, they just walked back out into the blizzard. While they were in my home, they either somehow didn't notice me on the couch or crept past me quietly, looking around my house without waking me even. The idea of it creeps the hell out of me. I haven't had a good night's sleep after that, constantly waking up in the middle of the night, startled by every It was New Year's Eve. I was never a big party person, but on big nights like these, I almost always got peer pressured into going out. This year, my friend was hosting a party at his place. He was kind of known as the rich friend because he had a big house with land and everything. Me buddy Trav picked me up around 99, and we drove to the party. There were maybe 20 or 30 people there, nothing too crazy, but enough to get me drinking more than I should have. We played some drinking games and watched the ball drop, and overall it was a good time. Around 3 a.m. though, I was ready to leave, but I found Trav passed out on a bed upstairs. Figuring he and probably nobody else here was sober enough to drive, I went outside and ordered an Uber. It said they were 10 minutes away, so I sat down on the curb at the end of the driveway and waited. His house wasn't really near any big roads. It was kind of away from everything, nice and quiet, which was good for me to relax after a night like that. I just sat there and curled up under my jacket and waited for the ride for what felt like only 4 or 5 minutes. When a car pulled up, Uber, the guy called out. I jumped up and got in, kind of startled by how I'd lost track of time like that. I guess I really was wasted. I got settled in the back seat and he started driving. The man looked like he was 50-ish with short dark hair and a thick beard. Big party tonight, he asked. Oh yeah, I guess so, I responded, though I wasn't much in the mood for small talk. He glanced at me in the mirror, and something about the look he gave me just made me uncomfortable. I really don't know why. At the time, I thought I was just overthinking it. I put my head back and closed my eyes, trying to rest for the remainder of the ride. But only a minute later, my phone dinged. I opened my eyes immediately, making eye contact with the driver in the mirror. He was already looking at me. Awkwardly glanced away and pulled my phone out. My stomach tightened and my face went pale. It was a message from the Uber app, a text saying the driver just arrived at the pickup location and a following text from the driver asking where he was. I looked back up at the mirror. The man's eyes were locked on me. I put my phone back in my pocket, leaned my head back, and closed my eyes again. Inside, he was freaking out and terrified, but I tried to play it off like I didn't know anything. 30 seconds later, I felt the car slowing down, and when I peeked out the window, I saw we were at an intersection with a red light. As soon as the car stopped, I opened the door and jumped out. Midway through getting out, he started driving, which made me fall in the pavement, but I got up and sprinted away. He drove off. After that, I don't know who that man was, but seemingly he was going around on New Year's night and picking up random drunk people waiting for Ubers. There were so many signs I missed, like the fact we weren't even going in the direction of my home. I was just too out of it to think straight. Honestly, I never even should have gotten in the car. Without checking my phone, where he would have taken me and what would have happened is unknown. It was the first weekend of February. I was at home having the days off of work. Everything was pretty regular, but sometime in the middle of the day on Saturday, I thought I heard something. From upstairs, it was a thud, just one, and not very alarmingly louder or anything. I'd never heard it before, which was the only reason I went up to see if I could figure out what it was. I didn't find anything, though I wasn't worried and hardly thought about it for the rest of the day. Hours later, and as I was winding down for the night, sitting on the couch and barely keeping my eyes open, there was another thud almost identical to the last. Again, I looked around and saw nothing. I even opened the door to the spare bedroom, which was entirely empty, and looked around, not seeing anything. Maybe it was an animal on the roof or just a house making strange noises. I went to bed that night. Not too long after, the next day, I got up and went downstairs like usual to make coffee and breakfast. As I did, something felt off, like as I walked around the kitchen and made breakfast, things seemed like they had been moved. The cereal and chips I had in the pantry just didn't look like they were where I'd left them. Obviously, I didn't purposefully try to remember the order if they were in or anything, so I couldn't confirm it. I just had that weird feeling like it wasn't right, which I didn't know how it could be possible. I tried to pay more attention to things the rest of that morning, but eventually I forgot about it. I think I was caught up on how impossible it would have been, so I had to be mistaken. The rest of that day, I was downstairs watching TV and doing some chores. It was just after sunset when I heard that same thought again. I stood up to go check on it just like every time before, but as I approached the stairs, I heard a click. It was very quiet, but was definitely a click of some kind. I went up to the top of the steps and listened for a second, then looked around my bedroom, finding nothing. Then I went over to the spare bedroom, figuring I might as well check again. I grabbed the handle and turned it, but it stopped halfway. It was locked from the other side. Blood rushed from my face and my heart stung from the sudden panic. I took a few weak steps away from the door, feeling like my legs were giving out, but I brought myself together when I heard movement behind the door approaching the other side. I started touring back down the stairs as I heard another click, followed by the door creaking open. I left out the front door and ran to the end of the street, where I called 911. When searching the home, they found no one, but in the spare bedroom closet there were grocery bags and a blanket. Someone had been trying to live in there, at least for those 2 days, but probably even longer without me knowing. Likely they were coming out at night while I was sleeping to go downstairs and eat and drink and do whatever. It sends chills through me just thinking about it. Thankfully they seemed to have left for good after that night. What they would have done had I found them is something I never even want to know. Every year around the end of February, me and my good friend Justin take a camping trip to the same place. We both did a lot of backpacking and camping, but there was always something different and nice about camping in a snowy forest with the right gear. It wasn't all that unsafe either. This year we got there and set up 4 tents, built up a campfire, and enjoyed a couple drinks around the flames. It wasn't really that long after we got there that we suddenly heard something horrifying. It was this dark scream in the distance echoing across the landscape. It only lasted a few seconds. Then it went quiet again. Both of us jumped up from our chairs, though startled by it. It sounded too far for us to even have a chance at seeing who it was, but we looked in that direction anyway. Justin seemed to think that it had to be an animal just making an eerily human sound, because there was no way someone else was out here. I was pretty sure it had to be a person, but either way, we didn't really know what to do about it, other than wait and see if we heard it again. A while passed and nothing else came. The sun started to set and the temperature started dropping. We grabbed some more wood to put into the fire and made food. But then again, out of nowhere, that scream sounded. It was closer, like maybe only 200 feet away from where our camp was. Justin and I looked at each other, both thinking that we should probably check it out before the sun was fully set. I grabbed my knife just in case, and we both bundled up and headed into The woods we tried to walk cautiously, unsure what exactly we were walking up on. We had maybe gotten 150 foot out when we heard it one more time from almost right next to us. I stopped and stared in that direction, but there was nothing there. I glanced at Justin, and he seemed as worried as I was. We must have stood still and waited there for nearly 5 minutes before Justin started slowly stepping forward again. He passed a few trees, when he suddenly stopped, and I could sense the fear through his body language. I stepped up next to him and I almost threw up. There was a deer carcass laying in the snow, definitely having been put down recently. Then I felt Justin's hand tap on my shoulder. It lifted my gaze up, and standing across the forest there was a person. He was just standing there wearing hardly any winter clothing, and he was watching Eustace almost like he was observing us. Justin tapped on my shoulder harder, and I understood what he meant. Both of us left and hurried back to our camp. We didn't even speak as we packed our things in a rush and got out of the area. I don't think there's an explanation for what we saw or who that was out there, or even if that was the person we heard screaming. After that, we stopped going to our camping spot and settled on a different area, hoping to never come across something like that. I was staying at a cabin in Canada. It's a family-owned lodge, nothing too big or fancy, just something my grandparents built and kept up with, so every now and again someone in the family would enjoy a getaway there. This was just after the New Year. I planned to stay 3 nights at the cabin. It was out in the middle of nowhere on some off-the-grid property that I had to get to by snowmobile, which was normal around this time of year. When I got there, I fired up the wood heater and set up my stuff in the bedroom. Within just 30 minutes I started to feel the scent of relief that I was hoping for. Time felt to move slower out there, and there was nothing to crowd my mind with. I could just lay back and enjoy the peace and quiet. The rest of that day and night was nice. I got up in the morning at sunrise, making breakfast on top of the wood stove. Then I bundled up to head outside and grab more wood. When I opened the front door I was taken aback. There were footprints in the snow coming right up to the cabin. I immediately stepped outside and looked around. Then I followed them for a while. They led into the woods with no signs of going toward the road, which was several miles away. How could they be way out here and not have taken a snowmobile? And why were they out here to begin with? I was really confused, especially with them having to have come up to the cabin during the middle of the night. Otherwise, I would have heard them in the morning. I got wood from the shed and brought it inside. I debated leaving, but I figured if they came by and didn't do anything, then it must have been an accident, not to mention how much of a hassle it was to get to and from the cabin. It just would have made this trip a huge waste to leave now. I sat by the fire and just kept a lookout for the next couple hours. I didn't see anything. As the sun got higher and the temperature got warmer, I threw my jacket back on and wanted to go for a walk in the woods to pass the time. I decided I might as well take the opportunity to see if the footprints led anywhere. Maybe I'd find another cabin or something, which would put my mind at ease. I followed them into the woods and walked for probably 20 minutes, not passing any signs of anything. It was just one continuous trail of prints in the snow going through the woods until I suddenly heard something ahead of me. I whipped my head up and looked ahead. It was suddenly quiet and everything was still, just endless trees and snow. I knew what I heard was the crunch of a footstep. There was no mistaking it. I felt goosebumps all over my body as I knew someone was out there in front of me, having to be hiding behind one of the trees. They probably just noticed me and quick head, maybe 10 or 15 feet from where I was. Hello, is someone out there? There was no response, not even the slightest sound. As the tension grew, I felt like I had to do something. I decided to turn around and run back to the cabin. I packed everything as quickly as I could, locked up the cabin, and took the snowmobile back to the road. I don't know what happened at that cabin or what was going to happen, but I have no doubt that that person in the woods was the same person who came by in the middle of the night. Them being on the way back to my cabin only shows that it was no accident. I haven't been back to the cabin after that.